So I've been working at Pearlfisher for 5 years now, and I think it really started just with a passion and a kind of obsession with psychology, which led to a passion and interest in consumer psychology, and from there really trying to unlock how I could translate that into brand strategy. And I think the two are so fundamentally linked, particularly with everything that we do here. It always starts with understanding your consumer, the ins and outs of how they live their life and what they want, and channeling that into a brand proposition that really resonates with those consumers. Well, I think for me, so much of it is what you're consuming. And often that's the sort of top line industry publications. But what I find really helpful whenever I'm starting a new project is going to where those consumers are. And it might sound a bit creepy, but I'm constantly trying to be in the forums, the spaces, or reading the magazines that they are as well. We were working on a kids food brand in the UK a year ago, and I was just constantly trawling Mumsnet, which is an online forum, just trying to understand the real way that they were thinking, the real attitudes they had to their family and their preoccupations with how that would actually affect their life. And from there, I could get a really interesting understanding of what it meant to live in their shoes for a day. And it was really helpful when I was creating that strategy. And the same thing, we were working for a pet food brand, and the first thing I did was just to go to this huge pet food store on the outskirts of the city and buy every publication in there, the magazines that the kids are reading, the more professional, high-level publications as well, just to really understand what it meant to be a pet owner. So I know that sounds super nerdy, but it's really the best way to really understand how people are thinking. Well, I think with stores, there's a few key things that we're seeing at the moment. I think particularly it's the interaction between, or the tension between e-commerce and brick and mortar. It's the move from traditional brick and mortar experiences to e-commerce, and then what we're really seeing now is the resurgence back into brick and mortar, and the two vying for each other's attention. The other big thing I think we're seeing is the attempt to create communities, brand creating communities for their stores. It's no longer just enough to be a one-stop shop for purchasing something. It's actually about connecting with other people who are doing the same thing as you. And I think brands and stores are really trying to foster that community to keep people coming back. And then the other interesting thing I think we're seeing in terms of trends with retail, with stores in particular, is inclusivity and social good. We're seeing so many stores trying to break down previous kind of binaries and restrictions about who should be there, who should be shopping there, who's welcome, who it's tailored to and catering towards as well. And actually sort of in place of a more prescriptive environment, they're actually creating these multi-dimensional and diverse spaces where everyone's welcome. When I moved to the US at the start of this year, I was expecting to see so many differences, and I definitely did. But I think the thing that shocked me the most was the similarities. Perhaps 10 years ago, you wouldn't have seen so many similarities in consumers and the way they shop. But because of the onset of social media, we're more connected and close, especially in the big cities, than we ever have been before. So yeah, I think the differences weren't really what got me. It was the similarities, given that I was so far away, that have really amazed me since being here. So for me, it kind of goes back to one of the trends I was talking about earlier, which is the connection between e-commerce and brick and mortar. Now, of course, you're going to have this multi-sensorial, amazing experience in brick and mortar. But what's really important is that you see, we think, e-commerce is something different to that. And I think brands now can no longer expect each one of those platforms to do it all. And actually, you've got to really understand that they have different roles. I think Casper, the mattress company, do a great job of this in New York. They have a brick and mortar store that is all about allowing you to experience the brand and the product. It's super tangible. You can literally fall asleep in there. But what their website does to sort of play into this, but play a differing role, is really get down to the functionalities of what the product is all about, the specifics, the sort of science behind it. And it's those two things that the consumer is going to need to actually finally make that purchase. So I think, the biggest thing that we're kind of noticing, to answer your question, is the interplay between those two platforms, the symbiotic relation between them both, and understanding that they have to play differing roles whilst also being part of the kind of same coin. This kind of taps into a bigger thing that we're seeing right now, which is kind of the interplay between locality and globalism for brands. I think the reality is brands have to have this huge global brands have to have a big universal idea that sets them apart, but they have to understand the local nuances that can really make them distinguished in a local market. So it's the two things playing together, that big unifying universal idea that complements that more nuanced local understanding. I think Nike and Coca-Cola in particular do a really good example of that, so that local communities definitely feel heard and the consumers can connect with them on that more nuanced understanding of the brand, but they still stand for something much bigger on a global scale. So I think there are several things that set us apart. Chiefly, and this is more the official answer, we have 3 studios. So we're not just a strategy and design consultancy. We also have a futures team, and our futures team are our innovation and insight hub. They kickstart all of the thinking that we do our brand, and they ensure that everything we do for all of our clients is future-proofed. And I think that interrelationship between those 3 studios across all 4 of our locations is a real differentiating factor for the clients that we work with. But I think for me, the really powerful thing about working at Pearlfisher is that we're still independently owned. And in a world where so many agencies are being bought up and turned into sort of big conglomerates, it's amazing to have the founders, after 26 or maybe even 27 years now, still really present in our day-to-day workings in everything that we do. And also to have the creative freedom and license to do what we want, which always leads to a much more kind of bold, lucid, and definitely at times unexpected approach to the briefs that we get. So I feel really proud to be part of a company that is fiercely independent and able to do what we feel is really right for the brands that we work on, rather than having to answer to bigger forces that be. I think one brand that we're talking, not that we worked on it, but one that we particularly admire for overcoming so many challenges, is what Teen Vogue's done in the last couple of years. When everyone was saying print was dead, I was so impressed when Teen Vogue transformed themselves from a publication to a platform and began to cover more social and political content in addition to fashion and culture, which their readers really responded to and actually evolved them into this place they are today. And the result that we see now is the forming of a community and new opportunities for the platform, and it's just doing so well. So I think that's just such a good example of people telling you it's over and actually rebranding to create something that is so engaging and powerful in the present. And then in terms of projects that I worked on, I think one that I'm particularly proud of is Tribe, which is a UK sports nutrition brand. We moved it out of a niche subscription space for extreme athletes into one that was for everyday performers. opening up the whole insight that it wasn't just about running polar expeditions and marathons, but it was actually for everyone who was just trying to get a bit more energy and exercise into their everyday. I think a little pet peeve for me is that I get really frustrated when clients and businesses and brands always try and frame the target consumer according to demographics, because it puts consumers in a box which is unhelpful. And actually, I think the reality is your audience is going to span so many more types of people that go outside of that very niche box. Today, I think it's much more important and progressive to think of consumers in terms of mindsets that can go across generations and geographies, rather than just boxing them in as this very small and constricted type of person that can be too limiting for what your brand needs to do to grow. I also get a tiny bit frustrated when people want to test design or creativity too much in research. I think research before a project kicks off to understand the market, the consumer or the category is so helpful. But actually when you're midway through the creative process, or perhaps even at the end of it, testing it with consumers can often throw you off. It's a really hard thing to quantify, creativity, and people don't often know what they want until it's part of their lives. So wherever possible, we try and say, trust in your gut and trust in us kind of being the experts and knowing what we need to do, rather than always falling on research to make the final call. I am a huge fan of Dave Trott. He's a British creative director and copywriter. And he speaks about the industry in the most frank and down-to-earth manner, which is so digestible and refreshing, given what some of the other industry publications tend to be like. Two of my favorite books, which my mum actually gave to me a couple of years ago, are 1 and 1 = 3 and Predatory Thinking, all which are quick to read. He writes in such a kind of punchy, short, easy to understand way, and he really makes you think about top line industry issues and challenges. I've seen him do a talk actually, and it's amazing because he does actually speak in exactly the same way as he writes, which for a strategist is kind of the holy grail, is to not be so long-winded in the way that you write. So I'm always looking to him for inspiration.